I am Nahid Kabbani, and this is the Lighthouse for today's viewers. Welcome to our show. As I always mention, we established this show just to shed some light about stories from Middle East American people doesn't know about it. Today, I guess everybody knows that we have some big issue in the Middle East, especially in Cairo. To know more about it, we have in our studio Professor Al-Qazzaz, sociology teacher. He will give us some idea about it. Let's welcome Professor Iyad.
Thank you.
Welcome to our show. You are not strange to this place or this topic. So what you teach about sociology?
I teach sociology at California State University, Sacramento. But my interest is the sociology of the Middle East. So for the last 40 years or so, maybe a little bit less, I've been teaching a course called Middle East Culture and Society. But also I had introduced two other courses related to the Middle East. One of them, oil conflict and development in the Middle East, and a third one, a graduate course on the Middle East and North Africa. But the one which is very popular, which I've been teaching it continuously with no interruption, is the one, Sociology 162, Middle East Culture and Society. And this semester I have approximately 220 students. So that gives you an idea. The course is very popular, and there's a lot of interest among the students in Sac State to know a little bit more about what's going on in the Middle East. So this is what I've been doing for the last years of my life.
That's wonderful.
Thank
That's
you.
what
Thank
I
you.
like to let our viewers know, because this is what we need now, to let American people know a little bit about Middle East. In our culture, in our programs, education system in Middle East, we learn about other side of the world. But here they teach very limited things. That's why your teaching is very important. So
thank you.
At this point, I should ask you, what's going on in the Middle East now?
Well, there's a lot of things going on in the Middle East. It will take us 1,001 nights to finish talking about it. And tonight is the first day, I guess. Yeah, there's a lot of things going on. There is an uprising in Tunis. There's a huge uprising in Egypt. And the situation everywhere in the Middle East is boiling, especially in the Arab countries. It is boiling in Jordan, it is boiling in Lebanon, it is boiling in Yemen, it is boiling in Syria. Of course, in Iraq is a chaos because of the invasion of that country by the U.S. armed forces. So everywhere there's boiling, and there's a lot of tension. And of course, there are reasons for that, and there are all sorts of things happening. But the biggest problem today, right now, especially in this country, is what is going on in Egypt. It happened about 14 days ago. The masses in Cairo, Egypt, they were all crowded in the Sahat al-Tahrir, or the Tahrir Square, or Tahrir Plaza, and they are determined to stay until there's a real change in the government of Egypt. So this is really what's going on.
Sahat Tahrir is the square, revolution square.
Yes,
so they meant to be there to meet.
It is a symbol of what's going on in the Egyptian history, definitely.
Why we should be interested?
Well, we are interested because Egypt is extremely important in American foreign policy. Without Egypt, we'll have a lot of difficulty to implement American foreign policy in Egypt. Why Egypt is important? Well, if you look at Egypt on the map, you are going to find out surrounded on the east part, you have Israel, and then you have the Red Sea, and then not too far, you have Saudi Arabia, and you have Lebanon and Syria, and then later on Iraq. On the west, you have Libya, and the south, you have Sudan, and there's a lot of trouble going on in Sudan, and on and on. Egypt has a treaty with Israel in 1979, and that allowed Israel to free its border from Egypt and shift all its attention on Syria and Lebanon and on the Palestinian. Egypt is the bridge through which we implement a lot of American program and a lot of American objective in that neighborhood. And if there is a real change in Egypt, it's going to affect the relationship with the U.S., it's going to affect the relationship with Israel, it's going to affect the relationship with the other Arab country and many African countries. So this is why Obama is not sleeping very well, I was told, and the administration in Washington, D.C., they have continuous follow-up about what is going on in Cairo, and they are trying to control the uprising in Egypt as much as they can with minimum concession to the people who are demonstrating in Tahrir Plaza or Tahrir Square. So Egypt is very important, and what is ever going to happen in Egypt is going to have an impact on our own foreign policy as well as our own domestic policy too.
So that means we give aid for the whole, almost the whole Middle East countries with the whole governments for some reason. I guess the security is the main reason.
Yeah.
That's why the government will not give that money to the people.
Yep. Yeah, we give aid basically to two countries in the Middle East. We do give aid to Jordan, we do give aid to Lebanon, but the overall is not that significant. But the two major countries who receive aid from the U.S. is Israel, which is approximately $3 billion. Egypt got about $2 billion. When we try to find out what kind of aid we give to Egypt, you are going to find out mainly military. About 1.3 billion or 1.4, I'm not sure about the statistics, go directly to the Egyptian armed forces to buy arms from this country, to train the Egyptian officer, and improve the overall capacity of the Egyptian army to do basically not only to protect Egypt from its border, but many times also to control the domestic situation. So most of the aid to Egypt is basically military. And the rest, the economical aid, is very, very limited. It's in the neighborhood of $500 million, little bit more or a little bit less. And even this economical aid, it's not necessarily to increase the productivity of the Egyptian economy, but rather to encourage the Egyptian to consume American product. And that's what's happening.
If we give that big amount of aid for military, where Egypt will use that military?
Well, the whole understanding is to use it, quote unquote, not only for domestic reason, but on occasion Egypt is asked to send a brigade to do some work in Africa or somewhere else. So we can use it in varieties of ways. One way is to be part, as I said, like when something happened in, not in Senegal, in Liberia, or something happened in Somalia, or something happened somewhere else. So they send some Egyptian brigade to be part, quote unquote, of the United Nations. The other things they use is to control the border between Israel and Egypt, like what is going on in Gaza. Who is enforcing blockade against the Gaza Strip? The Egyptian army, and that's what they are doing. So we are giving aid in order to do what the Americans want Egypt really to do, not what the Egyptians want to do. And that's as simple
That's
as
my point, because Egyptians will not use this military size against Arab or against their people.
Well, they did use it, by the way. In 1991, they used it against Iraq. I mean, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, Egypt played a very important role, quote unquote, to mobilize the Arab country against Iraq, and they sent, I don't know exactly how many Egyptian brigades to be part of the attacking force against Iraq. So they did use it too. But under the U.S. supervision, they did not do it alone.
So now the main issue for the military, Egyptian military, to keep security also for Israel?
Definitely to keep security for Israel and to keep the domestic uprising under control, or domestic unrest under control. And again, as I said, to be part, on occasion of a United Nations, to do some dirty job for the U.S. under the cover of the United Nations.
So it's a huge aid and a huge story now because everybody is worried about what's next. So let's have a break and talk about it a little bit.
You're watching The Lighthouse for today's viewers, brought to you by oneworldforyou.org.
So before the break, we were talking about the situation in general. I would like to ask you why it is happening in Cairo.
Well, that's a very good question. I'm really not surprised what happened in Cairo. I have to say I was surprised what happened in Tunis. What happened in Tunis is a surprise for everybody. That incident of December, I think 17, when Abu Aziza emulated himself, which started the whole revolution in Tunis, which ended up the president to flee the country in about 8 or 9 days later. From my perspective, the condition in Egypt is ripe for this uprising. And what happened in Tunis gave it the spark to begin that uprising in Egypt about 14 days ago. Yeah, why I say I'm not surprised? Because if you study the condition in Egypt, you are going to find out it's ripe for this uprising. Egypt is a very big country, which has almost now 88 million people. 1 out of 4 Arabs live in Egypt. That gives you an idea. But that population had increased tremendously over the years. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Egyptian population was only 7 million. In 1980s, about 50 million. Today is about 88 million, and we were told in 10, 15 years it will exceed the 100 million people. And what kind of population? About 2/3 of that population under the age of 30. About 50% of that population under the age of 20. So it's a very, very young population, which means that every year millions of people enter the market, and about 20% or more of the Egyptian population are unemployed. And if you add underemployment, it could be 30%, could be 35%. Egypt graduates so many university graduates. There are more university graduates in Egypt today than in England. And many of these university graduates have no job. They may stay 4 or 5 years to wait for a job in the government, which pay them maybe $50 or $70 or $80.
A month?
Yeah, a month. And most of them, they have to have a second or the third job. I had visited Egypt, I think, 4 or 5 times in the last 10 or 15 years. And surprisingly, most of the taxi drivers which I took in Cairo and around Cairo, they are all university graduates.
Wow.
They may have a job in the government who make $50 a month taxi driving or with some other jobs. So the economical situation in Egypt is extremely bad. The gap between the rich and the poor is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Most of the wealth in Egypt concentrated in less than 10% of the Egyptian society. I mean, it was rumored. I mean, I have no idea, I don't have the evidence, but the Western press had printed again and again the wealth of Mubarak alone and his family is about $70 billion. And the average Egyptian, about 2 or 3 million Egyptians living in Cairo today, they live on less than $1. Compare that, the $1 with the $70 billion. the family of the president of Egypt. So this gives you an idea that the economical condition is very, very ripe for the uprising. Tunis gave it the spark to begin this uprising. So there's a problem of inequality. There's a problem of no jobs. There's a problem that people has no hope, people has no future, and they don't see any green light. And this is why I said the condition there is ripe for the uprising. So I wasn't surprised to see what's really happening in Egypt.
So President Mubarak deal with this fact as a president for 30 years. Isn't it amazing to find president 30 years and no food on the table for his people?
That's definitely true. You see, this is what surprised me when Obama and Clinton talk about reform in Egypt. He's been there for 30 years and he didn't do any real reform, and he's 82. How can you expect a guy, he's 82, to reform himself after being in power for 30 years? So this is why I keep saying what really Obama and Clinton is saying is just for the public consumption. They are not really serious about introducing any serious change in Egypt, period.
I believe Mr. Mubarak, as a president, he is a Muslim.
He's a Muslim, yes.
Okay, I guess Islam rules. He shouldn't do that for his people, at least.
Well, yeah, but a lot of them are Muslim in name and they don't practice
That's
Islam.
What I thought, because now everybody is afraid that Muslim brothers or brotherhood will be in the scene, which is it's poor people make that revolution.
Definitely. But this is part of what I call it the counter-revolution, organized by the U.S. government plus members of the existing government in Egypt. Because when you study what a counter-revolution try to do, they always try to scare you. And what is going to be the alternative? And what is the alternative? The Brotherhood of Islam. And what's the Brotherhood of Islam? It means terrorism, it means jihad, it means this and that, all of the above. So this is part of the scare tactic used by the principals who organize the counter-revolution. You see, I happen to believe, from my perspective as a sociologist, not as anybody else. Now, let's assume there is a change, a serious change in the Egyptian government. From my perspective, the Brotherhood of Islam has to be part of that change. Because I happen to believe if you include people in the political process, you will be able to moderate them, and you will be able to talk to them, and you will be able to modify the original objective of that group. Exclusion means extremism. Exclusion means pushing people to the edge. And that is not good politics. So if I have to advise the American government, or if somebody asks me for advice, is that do not encourage any change in Egypt without the Brotherhood involved in that change. Because if you do not include them, you are asking for extremism, and you are responsible, not them.
Because they are part of the society also.
Of course, they
represent. Are Egyptian, and they have the right to be in the government.
Definitely. They are not only part of Egypt, they've proven to be an important element of the Egyptian society. In the year 2005, when there was an election, which was a little bit better than the last election, they got, if I remember my statistic correctly, 80 members in the deputies, in the parliament. So there were about 20% of the members of the Egyptian parliament of the year 2005 belonged to the Brotherhood of Islam. But they did not run as a party. They ran as an independent. So, by all account, most of the people who study the Egyptian society, and including sociologists and political scientists, they tell us probably their strength about 20%. And 20% is not 100%. It means there are other people who have different ideas, and they have different objectives, and they can work themselves into that texture of the Egyptian society. And I think if they are included, they are not going to be an extremist movement. They are not going to be an extremist organization.
Egypt is a Muslim country.
It is a Muslim country. About 90% of them are Muslim.
And the Brotherhood, how much percentage?
About 20% of the Muslims, they have sympathy with the Brotherhood. They are not member of the Brotherhood. It's an organization. But not everybody who sympathized with the Brotherhood are a member of the Brotherhood. But they have about 20% of the Egyptian
the
public
government
opinion.
pushed Brotherhood to be involved because they are not doing good for the people.
Well, that's true. That's
if they do good for the people, no need for any other interruption, either Brotherhood or other.
That's very
Why
true.
they have revolution if they have a good government taking care of them and living good, happy life?
That's exactly correct. You see, if the government was doing its job, performing its duties, providing people with good standard of living and security, you are not going to see many people sympathetic to the Brotherhood organization. That's as simple as that. Study proven again and again and again. But I guess people don't learn lessons. Government don't learn lessons. People in power, many times they tend to be blind to the reality. And that's happened in Egypt. It happened in this country too.
It is democracy comes from even shura, from Islam.
Yes, yeah.
And if 90% of the people Muslim and the government as Muslim, they should have some rules from their religion, control the bad behavior, and control the poverty. In Islam, you don't hear that much of poverty
that's
unless
true.
Corruption.
Yeah, that's true. But politicians are politicians, whether Muslim or Christian or Jews. Many times they become blind to the condition of their own society. And in the process, they become alienated. And as they become alienated, they become a tension and a gap between them and the people. And that is what motivates people to go for an uprising. Because if the condition wasn't there, there would be no uprising. If people are happy with the regime or with the system, there will be no uprising. If people think that they have a vested interest in the regime, they are not going to ask for the downfall of that regime. But people who are alienated, they have nothing in the regime. And that's as simple as that.
I believe we have to look around also. Other countries have the same system and the same 30, 40 years in governor.
Yep.
They are not kings, but they are under presidency, which is 6 years or 4 years or 8 years, whatever it is, will never end it within 30 or 40 years. That means they control with iron hand, control people. That means the situation in Egypt has similarity in other countries, which is scare me. That means all countries might be able to uprise the same way.
Definitely.
Because they should fight for their right after all.
Well, you see, this is why everybody is watching what's happening in Egypt. If the uprising in Egypt succeed, you can tell the regime in Yemen will change, the regime in Jordan will change, the regime in Syria will change, and God knows what will happen in Iraq. It's already a mess in Iraq. So everybody, Saudi Arabia, even Saudi Arabia, by the way, are scared to death. The Gulf countries are scared to death. So all of them are watching very, very carefully what's happening in Egypt. And some of them already came with a negative statement against what is happening in Egypt, like the statement by the king of Saudi Arabia and by Gaddafi of Libya. All of them are scared. And this is why all of them, they are trying to control and manage the Egyptian uprising as much as they can. Whether they are going to succeed, we do not know that. But they are going to do whatever they can, and they are buying time. And this is what they are doing. Yes, in Lebanon, the situation is boiling. Everywhere it's boiling. The king of Jordan, all of a sudden, he dumped his cabinet, and now he's going to form a new cabinet. And the new designated prime minister, he said he's going to consult with the opposition before he form a government. And all of a sudden, Syria and Jordan, and I think in Egypt, they start subsidizing a little bit more the essential element in the food, and on and on. So all of them are scared to death. And this is why I keep saying, and I repeated myself probably 5 or 6 times, what is going to happen in Egypt is going to have an impact everywhere. So there may be an uprising in Jordan, there may be an uprising in Yemen, there may be an uprising in Syria, and God knows. And in Libya, by the way, even in Libya, that Gaddafi, I mean, he's hated by his own people, unbelievably. And despite all of that, he came up with all these wild statements about what happened in Tunis and what's happening in Egypt. And instead of shutting his mouth, he's making all these wild statements about what's happening.
I'm surprised to find poor people
In
and
Libya.
poverty in Saudi Arabia, for example.
Arabia, yeah.
Rich country have the riches for the king and his family, and poor people around him. It's not fair.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not right.
They have poor people in Yemen, I mean in Libya, despite the fact they have good income from the oil. They have poverty everywhere. And these countries, especially the Gulf countries, they are buying people loyalty by sharing some money only with the native people. And when you talk about the Gulf countries, excluding Saudi Arabia, the native people is very, very small.
Yes.
How many Qatari citizens? 150,000. How many United Arab Emirates citizens? About 300,000.
Yeah.
So they are sharing some of the wealth with their own citizens, but not really that much, enough to keep them quiet. But for how long, we do not know that. But I think the major impact of the Egyptian uprising definitely is going to be in Jordan, in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria, Iraq, Libya, and it will have a ripple effect in the Gulf country, Saudi Arabia. By the way, it's affecting the stock market in the Gulf country. The stock market went down in Saudi Arabia, the stock market went down, so it's going to have an impact everywhere.
Nothing go forever. We
don't-
take it for granted. They take it for granted. Someday those human beings get fed up
Yep,
and
yeah.
will upraise everywhere. So there is a lot to talk about it. We'll have break and we will come back soon. So before the break, we were talking about what's going on around us from the Middle East and each country and the reason for the revolution. So I would like to talk about the counter of Uprising.
Well, it's normal. Every time there is a revolution, there is a counter-revolution. Every time there is an uprising, there is a counter-uprising. Who are the members in the counter-uprising? Basically, the existing regime, which the people are revolting against. But in the context of Egypt, the counter-uprising consists not only of Egypt, the old member of the regime, but also consists of the American government. The American government have a heavy interest in the promotion of the current regime in Egypt. About 10 days ago, if I remember my date correctly, the U.S. government sent Frank Wisner. And who is Frank Wisner? He's the former American ambassador to Egypt, and he's a very close friend of Mubarak. And he knows his dealing and wheeling and on. But in addition to that, the Israeli have a very vested interest in what is going on in Egypt. It's rumored that there is a guy by the name of Aveniri Shlomo, an Israeli guy, also a member of this counter-uprising, advising the Egyptian government about what exactly to do. Now, the counter-uprising is basically designed to buy time so they can deal with the uprising. What do? They do a lot of things. One of the things, they keep saying that the uprising, for example, is affecting the daily life of the Egyptian. The Egyptian, they want to live, they want to survive, but now they cannot buy food, they cannot go to their job, etc. They spread rumors that the alternative to the current regime is going to be bad and very risky. This is what I keep saying. Who's going to be in charge of the new government? Probably the Brotherhood of Islam. And we already talked about it in the first segment of the job. That is scaring people. If this uprising is going to continue, it will affect tourism in Egypt. And tourism is a very important element of the Egyptian economy. It may account to about 5 or 6% of the national general product. And it creates a lot of jobs in Egypt. I was told in one study, tourism alone creates about 2.5 million jobs. And if tourists are not going to come in Egypt, that is going to be a big hit on the Egyptian economy. And the counter uprisers, they try to use it to scare people. But also part of the tactics of the people in charge of the counter revolution is to do some cosmetic change with the existing government, changing a few ministers, changing a few people here and there, preventing people in the old regime from traveling, or they try to put their property under control, and so on and so forth. These cosmetic operations, which I call designed to buy time in order for the people in charge of the counter uprising to control the uprising and try to manage it and try to limit its own impact. So this is what the counter revolution is all about.
Wow. So who will believe that their government, they fed up from their government? Who will believe those talking? Who will stop them?
Well, I mean, the problem, they count on time. The counter-revolutionary, they count on time. The longer they can stay in power and the longer they can limit the impact of the uprising, they think they are going to succeed. And so now there's a test of will, by the way, going on between the people, for example, in Saht al-Tahrir and Tahrir Plaza, and among the uprisers in Egypt, throughout Egypt. By the way, the uprising is not limited to Cairo. People talk about Cairo, but it's happening in Alexandria, it's happening in Suez, happening in Ismailia, it's happening in Fayoum. And this is one
of the large cities in Egypt.
And this is one of the fascinating things about the Egyptian uprising. This is not a one single city. This is whole Egypt involved in this uprising. And this is why everybody is scared in this country, in Israel, and in many of the surrounding countries. So to go back, there's a test of will. Who is going to outlast the others? The people who are in uprising or the counter-revolutionary who are working against them? And only the coming few weeks will tell us really what's going to happen.
Are Egyptian people ready for that? Does they have somebody in mind to control the country after Mubarak,
well,
30 years of...
That's a very good question, and I don't think none of us has the crystal ball to tell us what's happening. One of the interesting points, the uprising was spontaneous, and it was not necessarily organized by a certain group of people. And when you look at what's happening, there are many people in the opposition against the government, but there's no unity among these oppositions. There are secular parties against the government. There are religious party against the government. There's the youth movement against the government. They are all united by a few goals. And one of these goals, Mubarak must go. Mubarak must go. And they want to have a new government, a new constitution, new parliament, etc., etc. But there's no one single leader where everybody revolves around. I mean, if I make a comparison, what happened in Iran in 1979, there was one person, and everybody is revolved around him. And he was the symbol of that movement against the Shah. Whether we like it or not, it doesn't matter, but Khomeini was the symbol. In Egypt today, there are many, many people against Mubarak and against his rotten regime, but there's no one person who may be able to, there's no one person which we can say, he is the symbol of the uprising. He is the symbol of what is going on in Egypt. And I guess in the coming few weeks, we are going to learn more about the directions of and the objective of the youth movement of January 25th. So this is one of the things which we really have to watch and see what's happening.
It comes to my mind to ask about what is the similarity or the unusual situation between Cairo now and Iraq.
Iraq?
At that time.
You mean what time in Iraq?
When the changes happen in the whole country.
Yeah, but the change in Iraq came from outside. It was invaded illegally by the American government.
To change the regime.
They changed the regime, but also they are playing a very, very important role in shaping the policy of the current Iraqi regime and the government of Iraq. I mean, We still have 50,000 troops in Iraq. In addition to that, which nobody really talk about it, which is more dangerous and serious than the American troops, is about over 100,000 private contractors who worked for the American army, but they have the civilian cover, and therefore nobody talk about them, and therefore they are not accountable to anybody. And this is happening, by the way, in Afghanistan too. In addition to the armed forces, we have a private contractor. These are contractors contracted by the Defense Department to do jobs, which in the past used to be done by the American forces. So in Iraq, I happen to believe we are not going to leave Iraq. And whoever tell you that we are going to leave Iraq, you can tell him I said you are a liar. We are going to have bases in Iraq. We are going to have a private contractor in Iraq, and we are going to shape Iraq. It is to our own interest to have a weak government in Iraq. They fight with each other, and therefore they are not going to play any part in Arab issue or Middle Eastern issue or any other issue. Let them fight among themselves, and let them have a mini-state, small mini-state here and there in the north and maybe in the south, in the middle, and let them fight with each other, and we are going to pull the string behind the scene. And this is democracy, and democracy means people fight with each other. This is what I tell you.
But democracy comes from within, inside the country, not from outside.
Well, I mean, this is an excuse. I mean, this is why the U.S. foreign policy based on hypocrisy. They tell you we are promoting human rights, we are promoting democracy. They promote it only when it serves their own interest. I mean, Biden was asked about Mubarak. Do you think that he's a dictator? He said, no, he's not a dictator. He's a good friend of us. He helped us quite a bit in implementing American foreign policy and American objective. So foreign policy, not only of the U.S., in fairness, all foreign policy everywhere based on interest. And we are going to support a person, whether he's a dictator or he's son of a ditch or whatever it is, if he's going to promote our own interests. If we don't, then we say all sorts of things about him. We may invoke democracy against him, like what we did with Saddam. He's a dictator, he brutalizes his own people, etc., etc. But they replaced it with a government worse than Saddam.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, by all account, more than 500,000 Iraqi died since we invaded Iraq. For what purpose? Did we have a democracy? The answer to that, definitely, definitely not.
But what it left with people, the hatred or the sadness, which is, we'll never forget it.
Yes, yeah.
People who lost part of the family, members of the family through that, will never forgive America or forget what happened.
You see, this is the sad part. This is a very important point you are pointing out, is that we tend to be on the wrong side of the aisle. And instead of supporting the people, and instead of helping the people, and instead of doing something about them, we end up supporting dictators. We end up supporting autocratic regimes who are more interested in enriching their pockets than doing something to their own people. I mean, it is really, really strange, and I don't understand that. Because when you study this country, you are going to find out there's so many qualified people who know what is going on in the Middle East, who can advise the American government about what's going on in the Middle East. Why they move in that direction, why they are not on the side of the people, I have no idea. It's very strange.
I believe you lost somebody from your
Well, I lost 2 people in the invasion, and I lost 2 people during the sanction in Iraq. Because now nobody talk about the sanction about Iraq. We impose the most severe sanction against Iraqis between the year of 1990 till the year 2003 when we invaded Iraq. There were times the Iraqi government cannot import even pencil, because pencil, according to the U.S. official, has dual use. It could be used, quote unquote, for military purposes.
Wow. Okay.
So that gives you an idea about what's happening. And people wonder why over there they hate American foreign policy. Because American foreign policy is not designed to help the people. It is designed to protect the autocrat and the dictators in that neighborhood.
I mean, there is an interest in certain way about Arab world and oil and things, but we can, as America, get what we want with different way.
Definitely.
I mean, we do harm, then we help. What if we help from the beginning and let people feel how generous we are? Then we take what we want from them. They will be more happy to give us what we want.
Definitely.
More than the weapon and the military and things and killing and raise the hatred and the sadness. And why?
Definitely. You see, I mean, they can get the oil. I mean, people are not going to drink the oil. They are going to sell it. All what you have to do, pay a fair share, and they will give it to you. Even Iraq, they said, we are not going to drink the oil, give us a fair share. But unfortunately, corporation, in one fashion or another, they want to be in charge. And corporation, honestly, they don't care except to protect their own interests. They are not going to care about other people. They give you crumbs, and they call it foreign aid. They give you nothing, and they call it foreign aid. And that is what they do. But what's scaring me the most is really people are not willing to understand why people in that neighborhood don't like American foreign policy. Because based on a rotten principle, the principle of supporting dictators and rotten people is not supporting the people themselves, their need, and their objective in good standard of living, and on and on and on. So they need a radical change. The problem, by the way, in Egypt is the U.S. I happen to believe, and I said that publicly in the last few weeks, is that if the U.S. is willing to accept real change in Egypt, it will happen. But right now, the U.S. is not in the mood to accept real change. They want to have a control change to keep the regime the way it is and a different face with minimum concession to the people.
The most ridiculous reason to me, talking about invasion or create war in the other side of the world, to create jobs, which is unbelievable reason.
Yes, oh, definitely.
Unbelievable, because we are losing our kids also, and we are destroying families, while even our military come back, they don't come back the same way they left us.
Definitely, no,
they
I
are
agree.
sometimes hopeless, useless for the family.
Yep, yeah.
Which is sad to see how many disabled people come back, and the veteran situation, how bad it is.
Yep, yeah.
So there is a lot to talk also about this point. Let's have a break, and we'll be back soon.
You're watching The Lighthouse for today's viewers, brought to you by oneworldforyou.org.
So I would like to know, me and my viewers, the situation in Cairo, how it will impact Israel's situation.
Well, it's going to have a huge impact if there is a serious change in the Egyptian government. And this is why Israel today, with the U.S., trying to do whatever they can in order to limit the impact of that uprising in Egypt. Why Egypt is very important to Israel? Well, they have a border with Israel, with Egypt to begin with, and they have a treaty of 1979, the Camp David Agreement, where, quote unquote, they came to a peace treaty between the two. As a result of that peace treaty, by the way, with Egypt, Israel started getting $3 billion, both military and economical aid from the U.S., which is a very important and critical part of the Israeli economy. But in addition to that, because of the peace treaty, Israel armed forces were somewhat relieved from that border with Egypt. And now they are basically concentrating on Syria and Lebanon. They have a peace treaty with Jordan, so there's not much going on. If there's a serious change in the Egyptian government, that means they have to redeploy the Israeli forces along the southern border, and that's going to have a huge impact on the Israeli economy. And plus, there's another thing. Because of the existing Egyptian regime, Israel was able to impose a total blockade on Gaza Strip, because Gaza partly surrounded by the Egyptian. And Egypt went along with Israel to establish a serious blockade against Gaza. It is very possible, and I'm not speculating, and I'm not predicting either, that if there's a genuine change in the Egyptian government, that blockade on the Egyptian part will be lifted. And that, quote unquote, will upset the White House, will upset Israel, and will upset the European power who claim they are against the blockade, but they do nothing to really to lift that blockade. So, and if there's a really serious change in Egypt, then mean there will be some changes in Syria, some changes in Jordan, some changes in Saudi Arabia, and the climate of opinion will be more aggressive against Israel than ever before. Wow. But that, if there is a serious changes in the Egyptian government, I cannot tell you whether it's going to happen or not, but that's the direction. If there's a serious change in the Egyptian government, will move. Not immediately, by the way. There's a change, a serious change in the, it's not going to say, hey, we no longer have a treaty with you, we no longer do this and that, but it will take some time. But definitely it will go in that direction.
So everything happened, or everything will happen. The main issue to protect, we have to focus on protect Israel.
That's exactly correct.
What about the other people in the world?
No, I mean, if you listen to the comments by a quote unquote the official in this country, plus the congressmen and women, including His Highness Senator McCain and others, the moment they start committing on the issue, they talk about Israel. And they pay a lip service to the need and the justice of the Egyptian people. You see, this is really the sad story. You see, I happen to believe in the long run, if they pay attention to the Egyptian people or the Arab people, they will, in one fashion or another, enable Israel to live in peace with the Arab and with everybody else in that neighborhood. If they take into consideration the Arab side more seriously, it will be a very different story. But they are totally blinded. They don't see anything about the Middle East except through the prism of Israel.
For how long will be blind? For how long people keep quiet and hungry and accepting what the kind of life they live in just because there is a control? If there is something wrong, will not be peace until that wrong thing will be fixed up.
You see, people they don't learn from history.
Okay, if you are in position as a president or as a controller in America, don't you think you have to look around why the Middle East give us hard time, why the Middle East unstable, or they hate Israel or talk bad about Israel?
Well, this is a simple question and requires a simple answer. Why people hate American foreign policy? We need to understand the causes. And if you don't pay attention to the causes, the condition will stay there. It will affect their feeling about us. An important reason why people in that neighborhood dislike American foreign policy because of the U.S. attitude toward Israel. And they do not take the interest of the Arab people in that policy. They focus only on Israel, period. And a good example of what I'm saying, listen to the comments. After the Egyptian uprising, all what they care about Israel. What is happening elsewhere, it's not of a concern to them. But in the process, by doing so, they are not really quietening the situation over there. To the contrary, more and more people are getting mad. I mean, even if you watch what is happening in Cairo and in other parts of Egypt in the last 14 days, in the beginning, they didn't mention America. But now some of them start holding signs against America because they do know part of the problem in Egypt is America and part of the problem in Israel. So they have to deal not only with their Egyptian government, they have to deal with America and Israel too.
So we are the fighter for human rights everywhere.
Yes,
Okay, if you look back to Palestine-Israeli issue, and if you look back, where are the 500,000 Palestinians in Lebanon living 62 years in poverty with no jobs, with no real life, with no identity, have laissez-passer? How long they will take it until they have the revolution, the same from,
You see,
like Egypt or other.
these are conditioned. This is why I keep saying there's nothing surprising of what's happening in Egypt. Nothing surprising for anything happening in Lebanon. Nothing surprising in Jordan. The condition is there, and that's as simple as that. So you have to address it. Why they are not addressing it, I don't understand that, honestly. Do they know about it? The answer to that is yes. Our university graduates so many experts on the Middle East, and including the Arab world. And Washington, D.C. have access to this expertise. They have access to the study done by these people, and they have access to their advice. But they don't listen to them. They don't listen to them. Why they don't listen to them? It baffled the hell out of me. I really don't.
I mean, the Middle East, especially Palestine, it's the holy land for three religions.
Three religions, yes.
If we think about religion side, three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, raises there, started there. That means the rules of God. God rules goes from that point. And God rules similar to each other with the three religions. Started with Judaism. God didn't change his mind. So it didn't come with revolution. It comes over there. So all Arab, all Muslim, all Palestinian know the same idea of that story. European side, the story goes to them. It's creativity of things. But to me, as Palestinian and Israeli issue, either you have to count it either religion or politics. If religion follow the direction from Torah and Bible and Quran, if politics acceptable as invasion and occupation, you cannot steal land and kick people out with no reason. Those people didn't do the Holocaust. Those people, I am one of them. I lived Palestine 1948. I was 7 years old. I remember things. It's my homeland, it's my country. We went to Syria, we went to Kuwait with the same thing. I came to America, I'm proud to be American because I am American now. I have citizenship, I have rights, like the same exactly with American people, which is make me a human being. I raised my kids here, I took them away from that fight situation. I don't want to lose my kids for nothing. So, but most of the people cannot come to, couldn't come to America, and they are in Lebanon or Syria or all over the world. This is a story we should study it. If there is no justice,
there's no peace.
There is no peace, no matter what we spend on military or on controlling government 30, 40, 20, 50 years. After all, people will give up, will fit up. Like in Tunis, the guy burned himself. And Algeria, they copy the idea also.
And in Egypt too.
Okay, people have no reason to live after that. After all, there is something will be happen. Why we don't realize that? Let's focus, let's study the situation, let's have solution. Help people to live better life with justice.
You see, American foreign policy, unfortunately, they don't talk about justice. If you have noticed, even the way they are covering the uprising in Egypt, they talk about democracy and freedom. They don't talk about justice and fairness and jobs for the people. If they ever talk about jobs, it comes second or third or fourth. But they talk about democracy to cover up their own intention. These are slogans, but they don't mean anything. But to go back to the issue which you raised about Jerusalem, I happen, and the three religions, I happen to believe the issue is political, and they use religion to justify their behavior. I mean, there's nothing in the three books, go and kill for the sake of killing. There's nothing in this book, you go and take the land.
No, in
of other
Judaism,
people.
if you kill one person with no
You kill
right, like
everybody.
you kill
kill
the whole
everybody.
world.
And that's
So,
repeated in the Quran, by the
Yes.
way. Yeah, so I mean, it is all political, and it's all power, and it's all control. And when you study the behavior from A to Z, you will find out it is under the umbrella of religion, but in reality is all grabbing land and others.
Also, if you follow the religion side, okay, God, the one who get mad at the Judaism, Jews, not us. God sent Jesus, not us.
Yep.
We are not God. We
Yep,
are a
yep.
human being. We are
Yes,
living
yeah.
in that area.
Yes, yeah.
So if it is religion, follow the religion rules.
They don't. As
They
I said,
don't.
it's a
So
cover-up. It's a
that's
cover-up.
the dilemma. No
it's-
clear picture of that story.
But you see, politicians in the past and today and in the future, they use religion to justify what they are doing. It is easier to persuade people in terms of religion than to persuade them on other principles. So it is not something new. It's used in the past, used today, it will be used in the future. People use religion to justify what they are doing.
Okay, but can you control how many billion Muslims in the whole world? They know the same idea about Israel. How long you control them?
I have no idea.
It's better to have some solution balance. But you scare me when you said democracy and freedom. If I get my freedom through democracy, okay, I am free to do. I'm free to say, I'm free to whatever thing.
Yep.
Okay, that means the disaster.
Well,
if there is no control.
Well, there are limits, and yeah, definitely, yeah, I agree.
Especially with the media now, the open air and technology, Facebook, internet, YouTube, whatever made the revolution in Egypt will be
And by the way,
continued.
without what you said, the Facebook and the internet, and without the Jazeera, the Egyptian government could crash that uprising, if not the first day, the second day. So we have to thank the new technology, and we have to thank the Jazeera and the other media of communication for allowing the uprising to continue and to be
CNN
protected.
does that too. CNN does a lot of good things too.
But they did
not
at the
just
very
Arab.
end. They did it at the middle. They did not in the beginning. They tried to ignore it. They ignored the Tunisian practically till the last 2 days.
But after all,
Yeah, because, I mean, the American media, not all of them are for what is happening, but they got a good taste of what's happening when Anderson was roughed up and when the members of the other American media, NBC and CBS, et cetera, so the answer to that, yes, they came to the coverage, but they came a bit late. They are not really showing exactly what is happening. I have followed the Jazeera and I followed the other satellite and even the Egyptian, and there's a lot of details are not really covered in the American media.
it need another show.
That's
Before
another
we
show.
go, I want you as a teacher
No.
to give us a conclusion or what we learn from all what we talk about.
I tell you, all what I can say, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 points. Number one, we need to watch what's happening in Egypt. It could be the starting point for a real change throughout the area. And if this has happened, it's going to affect the American foreign policy. It's going to affect the policy of many of the surrounding country in that neighborhood. Why I say that? Because Egypt is a big country. Look at the location of Egypt. Look at the Suez Canal. Look at the other part has a rich history, very complex history, and contributed a lot to the present-day civilization. So whatever is happening is going to have an impact.
On behalf of my viewers, I would like to thank you, Professor Al-Qazzaz, and hopefully we'll see you some other time. For you, my viewers, I thank you for watching. And to me, no peace with no justice. So let's hope to look for justice for all to live happier and peaceful. Let you go. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.